Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. If you're watching on the YouTube, you can see that my background is a little different. I am on vacation this week, so hopefully the YouTube video gets uploaded. I'm not sure what the internet speeds here are. If not, it will be an audio-only podcast, so for you audio listeners, it won't make any difference. For the YouTube viewers, it might be a little different, or it might not happen at all. So we will see what the internet does. Starting off today with the most important news, Xbox Series X and Series S pre-orders went live today, and I got my Series X pre-ordered successfully. So we're going to jump into congratulate or commiserate here, but I think we can do a congratulations for anybody who successfully got a Series X or Series S pre-ordered. I know there was a lot of issues online, so just wanted to share that with you guys. I successfully got my X pre-ordered, and I'm super pumped to open that up and play it in November. So we will jump into the real congratulate or commiserate. This is a segment where I just talk about how I did my 3 leagues, and then we discuss how some listeners did in their leagues who share on either Twitter or Instagram or wherever they want to message me. So Week 2 was a little bit of a mixed bag for your favorite nerdy fantasy football podcaster. I went 2-1, which sounds pretty good, but the one victory I got was only because I was playing the lowest scorer in the league. I was actually the 3rd lowest scorer. So that was my ESPN league. Josh Allen was a stud for me. Unfortunately, Todd Gurley, David Johnson did not do well. AJ Brown didn't suit up. So like I talked about Paris Campbell last week, I ended up playing him in my wide receiver 2 spot with AJ Brown out, and he got hurt the first play of the game. And Michael Gallup is apparently invisible for the Dallas Cowboys. So I have some wide receiver issues to figure out. Hopefully, David Johnson can get it going again this week. I know the Ravens were a tough matchup. He plays at Pittsburgh in week 3, another tough matchup, but I'm probably keeping it in my lineup. Todd Gurley, I'm unsure about. I might be switching him out for Antonio Gibson or Mark Ingram this week. Maybe I can work a trade and end up with a wide receiver instead while I deal with this A.J. Brown injury. The good news is I do have Deontay Johnson. He was on my bench this week, unfortunately. I opted for Paris Campbell based on the matchup and Campbell's usage in week 1. It didn't hurt me in this league because I won. My Yahoo league, my 12-team Yahoo Superflex league, I did lose. A.J. Brown is also on that team. I had to bench him. Again, I went with Paris Campbell. He was the best available wide receiver on the waiver wire, and it didn't pan out for me there. I played the Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook guy. This was an auction draft, by the way, so he went really hard on running backs. That's why he owns both of them on his roster. So yeah, just a tough week. And then my Dynasty League, I actually was the 2nd highest point scorer. That went really well. Dak and Cam led the way. Stephon Diggs, my wide receiver. I had David Montgomery and Kareem Hunt leading the way for running backs. And that was the only bright spot in my weekend. I finished 2-1, I guess, so I can't complain that much. It was just a lucky matchup in my ESPN League. Hopefully week 3 we will bounce back and do better. So I have one listener who responded on Twitter. His name is Zach. He said that he railed the 3-time league champion and sent him to 0-2 start. No doubt, much to the delight of every other league mate. I've been there. I've had a guy in my league win multiple championships, and everyone's kind of rooting against him. So this is awesome for Zach. His team was led to victory by the weekly long touchdown from Raheem Mostert. If that can become a weekly thing, that will be awesome for Mostert owners. I know he's a little banged up now. And then the touchdown machine that is Calvin Ridley. Those are 2 good starts this week. Congrats to Zach. Hopefully you and your league can sustain this success and keep dominating your 3-time champ, who you so eloquently put is living in the past. So good job, Zach. Thanks for listening to the podcast, and thanks for writing it on Twitter. Remember, next week you can share your results on Twitter, and we can either congratulate or commiserate you, and you can congratulate or commiserate with others, and myself included. So usually the Tuesday episode has the high flying and nose diving segment, where I will look at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, talk about someone who's high flying at that position, and then someone who's on the decline and is nose diving. Unfortunately, there was a ton of injuries. I've dubbed it the week 2 injury plague. So instead of going for the normal high flying nosediving, I'm just going to go through the injury plague news, and that will be the nosediving section. And then I'll go through some high flying players at each position. So starting with the biggest one, probably, Saquon Barkley is done for the season with a torn ACL. This really sucks. He didn't even finish the game. It was a really early injury. So if you played him this week, you got punished for it. And now you're scrambling, trying to figure out what to do without your first rounder. Christian McCaffrey is out for multiple weeks with an ankle injury. Another big one, another first rounder. This sucks. At least he did play the game. So you didn't get a terrible score this week. But you're going to have to figure out what to do with him for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Raheem Mostert, the aforementioned Raheem Mostert, has an MCL sprain and is doubtful for week 3. This is unfortunate. He's done really well the first 2 weeks. And if you're counting on him as your RB1 or 2, this is bad news. Staying with the San Francisco 49ers, Tevin Coleman left with a knee injury as well. So it's Jerick McKinnon time, I guess. We will talk about him a little bit later, but Jerick McKinnon lives, and he's a real thing. David Montgomery left for a while with a neck injury, but was able to return. This was good. I have David Montgomery in my Dynasty League, so I was bummed to see him leave the game. But then when he came back in, he did well, and hopefully it's not a serious injury that will prevent him from practicing or playing going forward. Cam Akers was knocked out with a rib injury. I am a Cam Akers owner in my Dynasty League, so you hate to see this. Malcolm Brown wasn't that efficient this week, so it could have been a Cam Akers week. Unfortunately, he was knocked out early with an injury. Devontae Adams left in the second half, but said that he could have come back in. So they were blowing out the Lions. The coaching staff wanted to hold Adams out. He said that he could have come back in, so hopefully the injury is not serious, and we will actually see him in week 3. Courtland Sutton, who was questionable for the week, ended up leaving the game with cramping and knee issues. So monitor that going forward. He just might be a questionable player for the next few weeks, just with that perpetual Q next to his name. Paris Campbell. Like I mentioned, I played Paris Campbell in 2 leagues where A.J. Brown was out for me. So he was my backup. Paris Campbell left with an apparent knee injury. It's come out that it's a PCL injury. So he's out for the foreseeable future. And of course, it was the first play of the game. So you got 7 yards out of him, and then he was out. Tough break. I talked him up last week on the podcast. I really thought he could have done well had he been in there and not gotten injured. Sterling Shepard left the game with a toe injury. I think Golden Tate is banged up. So Darius Slayton, I guess, is a good grab and stash. I don't know if you're starting him this week, but with all the other injuries going around, they're going to need Darius Slayton. Jerry Jeudy is dealing with a rib injury, but did return after leaving for a bit. So that's good news. He came back in. Hopefully he's able to go in week 3, especially if Courtland Sutton's out. And we'll just say Drew Lock has a sprained AC joint on his throwing shoulder and will be sidelined 2 to 6 weeks. So even if Jerry Jeudy's back, what kind of targets are you going to get? Are they going to be valuable? I have my doubts. And then Jimmy Garoppolo suffered a high ankle sprain and was replaced by Nick Mullins. So Garoppolo is expected to miss about 4 weeks. This is a damper on my hopes for Deebo Samuel coming back. Like I've mentioned before, I own Deebo in all 3 of my leagues. I'm just waiting for him to come back. But without Jimmy G and playing with Nick Mullins, take your time, Deebo. Make sure you're healthy to come back. Don't rush it for these Nick Mullins games. I'd rather have you in the second half of the season than have you come back too early, get hurt playing with Nick Mullins. Okay, so those are the main injuries that we talked about. Let's get into the high-flying section. So my high-flying quarterback for this week is Joe Burrow. Could it be anybody else? He looks like a franchise QB, and the Bengals are not shy about using him. As a reminder, he had over 60 attempts in the game. That's a lot of attempts. I don't know if the Bengals can keep it up, but because he's a stud, he's their guy. He's who they want to use. I will keep playing Joe Burrow as a fringe top 10 quarterback, and hopefully he can sustain his success. My high-flying running back is Jonathan Taylor. So Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor were 2 key guys to focus on going into week 2 with the Marlon Mack Achilles injury. Nyheim Hines was a big waiver wire pickup in week 2, and Hines ended up only playing 9 of the 70-something offensive snaps, while Taylor was out there for 49 and carried 26 times for 101 yards with a touchdown. So Nyheim Hines is not a threat to Jonathan Taylor. I would not be worried about him. He is a full workhorse status now. And if week 1 showed anything, it showed that he had receiver chops too. He had 60-something receiving yards, even though he only had 20 rushing yards in week 1. So I'd start him as a running back 1 for the rest of the season. My high-flying wide receiver is Deontay Johnson. 23 targets through 2 weeks, a 34% target share, and the only receiver in the league to receive 10-plus targets in both weeks, 1 and 2. So sign me up. I am on board for Deontay Johnson being a weekly starter. My high-flying tight end is Jonnu Smith. He completely crushed it on Sunday with A.J. Brown sidelined. He had a touchdown in week 1 and 2 more in week 2. And he's on pace for 95 targets. He's a top 10 tight end going forward, no questions. And I can see him pushing to be a top 5 finish if these target numbers keep up. And we will end up talking about Jonnu Smith here in a little bit. My nose diving tight end, I did add a nose diving tight end because there was no notable tight end injuries. For the other nose diving positions, just go back up to my injury section. All those guys, it was a depressing week in fantasy football. So my nose diving tight end here is Zach Ertz. He's sitting at tight end 19 through 2 weeks, which isn't what early tight end drafters want to see. He has had 7 targets in both weeks so far, but for only a total of 60 yards. And on top of that, Dallas Goedert has outpaced him in targets in both weeks. So people are potentially right to be worried about Ertz moving forward. I would be worried about Ertz. I talked Goddard up last week in my podcast as a good pickup. I think he still is if he's available. He's probably not at this point, but Goddard might end up being the tight end 1 on this team. And if you drafted Ertz early, you're not happy right now. So that's the nose diving and high flying section. Just to recap, high flying QB Joe Burrow, I would feel confident starting him going forward. High flying running back Jonathan Taylor, he is an RB1 going forward. Start him over basically any RB2 that you could think of. I know Jonathan Taylor was probably drafted as your RB2, but he's your RB1 now. High flying wide receiver Deontay Johnson. I have Deontay Johnson. I'm starting him. No questions asked going forward. He looks like the number 1 wide receiver for the Steelers. High flying tight end Jonnu Smith and nose diving tight end Zach Ertz. So we'll get into the other Tuesday segment here. This is straight fire from the waiver wire. So I will go through some of my favorite waiver wire targets for running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Like I mentioned last week, I'm not going to go through waiver wire QBs. If you're streaming QBs, you really want to play based on the matchup. That's not really a waiver wire pickup. That's more of a strategy for fantasy football. And if you're not streaming QBs, you have 1 or 2 QBs on your roster that you're playing. And unless there's an injury, you're not really looking to pick up QBs. So we will start with the running backs. My top target is running back Mike Davis for the Carolina Panthers. So get yourself a starting running back for the next 4 to 6 weeks. If you can get that off the waiver wire at any point in the season, it's very valuable. Coach Matt Rule says that Davis is a threat in the backfield and looks to have the coaching staff's confidence as a receiver based on week 2's 8 receptions for 74 yards. I would spend about 20% of my fab if I was shallow at running back to guarantee a starter for the next month. I think Mike Davis is worth it. I think he's going to get the work. So I would spend about that much only if you're shallow on running back. He's no Christian McCaffrey replacement, and he's not even a season-long replacement. He's just there for a month. So if you need a starting running back for the next month, 20% of the fab is what I'd be willing to go on him. Other running backs to take a look at, I would look towards Dion Lewis and Wayne Gallman to fill Saquon's vacated role. I think Gallman's the guy you want more shares of, but Lewis will still be involved thanks to his reputation in the passing game. And I have caution here, don't overspend. They are not Saquon, and the Giants are by no means a great team. So while they will be getting more snaps, they will have to play running back. The Giants do have to field a team. I would not expect Dion Lewis and Wayne Gallman to even combine to produce Saquon-level production. Jerick McKinnon, he was getting used in week 1, and with a unhealthy backfield that the 49ers have now with Mostert and Coleman banged up, look for him to get more involved. 70 yards and a touchdown in week 2 and 20 receiving yards with a touchdown in week 1 point to him having a little bit of juice left. I think you could get a couple starts out of McKinnon here. And I know his 70 yards this week came on only 3 carries, but if he's getting more carries and if he can be productive and keep that yards per carry up, he scored in both weeks, so I think he's a solid flyer in your flex spot. And then Darrell Henderson, if Cam Akers is out, but I don't think the Rams have confidence in him. Otherwise, they wouldn't have drafted Akers in the first place. So you can pick up Darrell Henderson hoping that he becomes something, but I wouldn't bank on it. My top wide receiver to grab is Russell Gage. He had 21 targets through 2 weeks and topped 100 yards in week 1 while grabbing a TD in week 2. Atlanta is letting Ryan be a gunslinger out there, so why not get in on the action? Julio's also dealing with a hamstring injury that could open the door up even more for Gage going forward. So I like Russell Gage. I like the offense. I like his targets. I would spend about 5 to 10% of fab on him, potentially more if it comes to light that Julio will miss time. If Julio's going to miss time, Russell Gage becomes a must-own. As of now, 5 to 10% of fab, that's probably my max on most wide receivers anyways. So if you need a wide receiver start, you have a bunch of wide receiver injuries, kind of like myself, Russell Gage is my top target to grab this week. Other wide receivers to consider, Zach Pascal. With Paris Campbell going down, Pascal was the one to pick up the slack and grab a TD from Rivers in week 2. So I like him just based on opportunity. Chase Claypool. With Big Ben under center, the Steelers could field 3 viable fantasy options, and Claypool looks like the most likely to break off a big touchdown in any given week. So you saw that long bomb touchdown this week. I think he has the highest probability out of Juju, Deontay Johnson, and himself to get that long touchdown any given week. So you could put him in your flex, end up with a solid 15 to 20 point week based on one play. And then Laviska Shenault. I mentioned him last week, and I still like him this week. He had 3 receptions on 4 targets, but he also had 5 rushes. So like I said last week, I think he's a good gadget player, and they're trying to use him kind of like Debo last year, where he's a receiver, but he's also getting rushes. So I think he has a decent yardage floor for a flex type of player. My top tight end is Jonnu Smith. He's rostered in only 50% of ESPN leagues right now, and he's the tight end 1 through the first 2 weeks, which is crazy. So if A.J. Brown continues to miss time, pencil in more TDs going to Jonnu as a guarantee. He's still going to be a stud even if Brown comes back, so I like Jonnu Smith. I have him ranked pretty high going forward. If I need a tight end and I don't want to get into the tight end streaming game, I would drop 30% of my fab on Jonnu Smith. Like I said, my models are projecting Jonnu Smith to push for that top 5 tight end finish on the season, especially if these targets keep up. I think he was on pace for like 94 targets or something. So yeah, I would spend big on Jonnu Smith if you need a tight end. Other tight ends to consider, Logan Thomas is still widely available. I still expect him to be Haskins' second receiving option behind Terry McLaurin, so you could look there. Mo Alley Cox had over 100 yards for Phillip Rivers and the Colts. He could be a viable streamer as long as Jack Doyle is injured. But like I mentioned, going into this week, Mo Alley Cox only had 30 career receptions. So once Jack Doyle comes back, Mo Alley Cox is pretty much droppable in all formats. And then Jordan Reed. So Jordan Reed caught a couple touchdowns for the 49ers with George Kittle sidelined. Hopefully George Kittle's not out too long. I have not seen an update for his week 3 status yet, but once George Kittle comes back, you can drop Jordan Reed. But until then, he's a decent streamer at tight end. He might not catch 2 touchdowns every week. He probably won't. But especially with Nick Mullins in, Nick Mullins is going to be looking for shorter passes probably. So you could do worse than Jordan Reed if George Kittle is still out. So that will about wrap up the Tuesday episode. Hopefully you guys all did well in week 2. You're getting ready for week 3. And hopefully these points help you take advantage of your waiver wire. Just to go over it again, my top running back target is Mike Davis. My top wide receiver target is Russell Gage. My top tight end is Jonnu Smith. So those are the guys I'm keying in on. Hopefully this video goes up on YouTube. If not, thank you for listening to the audio version. If you want to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, my handle is @TheFFActuary. I have a Facebook page, The Fantasy Football Actuary. And like I said, I do have a YouTube channel where video versions of this podcast go live. The YouTube channel is The Fantasy Football Actuary. So thank you for tuning into this Tuesday episode. And until next time, keep crunching those numbers.